Welcome to the RotoWire Fantasy Baseball Podcast. I'm your host, James Anderson. This week, got a familiar face, a good friend, Derek VanRiper, a professional podcast host extraordinaire, excellent fantasy analyst over at The Athletic. And I came up with a list of 32 of the most interesting or impactful developments of the offseason so far, and DVR and I are going to go back and forth, picking an item and discussing it based on what's most interesting to us from a fantasy standpoint. But first, DVR, just welcome to the show. Thanks for joining me. I really appreciate it, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me, James. Great to see you. Great to catch up with you as always.
Yeah. Had a fun time hanging out with you at First Pitch Arizona. Great to have you on the show. And the idea for this is just anyone who hasn't been paying attention to the offseason that closely can get fully up to speed on what at least Derek and I think is the most relevant stuff. And it's also an opportunity for me to discuss this stuff on the podcast, since I'm usually kind of in the weeds on prospects or draft strategy and not necessarily noting each development of the offseason. And of course, Derek hosts the great Rates and Barrels podcast, where he does cover a lot of this stuff. So perfect guest for this episode. Derek, I'll throw it to you. What do you want to cover first here that's happened since the start of the offseason?
We could start with Blake Snell. I mean, I think Blake Snell to the Dodgers, years and money don't even matter to the Dodgers, but he gets the big payday that many of us thought he would have got last offseason. And I kind of want to present this to you as another question of what's actually different about Blake Snell? What did we learn about Blake Snell in 2024 that we didn't know previously? And how much is his situation in 2025 is it going to mirror like Tyler Glass now, where now that he's a Dodger, people are going to like him even more, and it's going to be an extremely split group of drafters, people that think it's awesome in late round 2, early round 3, and people think it's the dumbest possible use of a second or third round pick.
Yeah, I can already see that developing. Recent ADP on Blake Snell, basically over the past 10 days or so, he's SP 12 off the board, going behind George Kirby, behind Chris Sale, but ahead of Dylan Cease he's SP 11, I should say, because Emmanuel Clase is going ahead of him. But he's getting treated like an SP 1 for the first time probably since coming off the 2018 season. I don't think he's ever been treated like an SP 1 since then.
I think the Rays Cy Young season was the one that vaulted him up there, and then because of all the different injuries, people have always been lukewarm, and then the walks too, right? And I have moved a little bit on walk rate over time. I can change. I think I'm capable of adapting to things. And the thing that he's always done is he's suppressed hits and he limits homers, and I think those are skills. Like, not necessarily equal to not walking guys, but not as far from it as I once thought, right? So you put him in front of a good overall defense year over year, despite having some questions at even shortstop sometimes. The Dodgers do a great job suppressing balls in play. They take away hits as well as any team in baseball, like year over year. They're consistently at or near the top of that team BABIP leaderboard. So the situation's as good as it's ever been for Snell, and now maybe we're getting even more wins on top of it because he's going to pitch for the best team in baseball, and maybe there's even a slight benefit for him of being in what will be a more consistent 6-man rotation. A lot of teams are using extra rest, but the Dodgers are absolutely built for it. So I'm probably leaning more toward the side of being comfortable with the rising price on Blake Snell. I think I'm a sheep in this case, James.
Well, you mentioned the high walk rate. I mean, he hasn't been a whip killer except for 2021. So even with the high walk rates, he's kind of been around like 120, 119 on the whip. Obviously, last year was his best mark since 2018 at 105. And I think the fact that he's kind of going right by Dylan Cease and Cole Ragans, I think that makes sense to me. I think those three pitchers I feel pretty similarly about, just big time strikeout upside. The walks can be an issue with Snell and Cease. I think Snell and Ragans are kind of similar from how many innings I'd project for them. I'd probably project more for Cease. But yeah, I think kind of low SP1 is perfectly fine. And I mean, the big thing is just the wins. Like with going to the Dodgers, Blake Snell has only won 9 or more games twice in his career, which is kind of crazy. And so I would expect him to get well up over 10 wins with the Dodgers. So yeah, I think low end SP1 for Blake Snell, and he was going, quite a bit later than that, obviously, before signing with the Dodgers. And there's risk when you're drafting a guy where you're not sure where they're going to be pitching, but now that we do know it's a very nice landing spot for all the reasons you mentioned, I do think he is a very, very fine low end SP1. Okay, I'll pick. This one's not. It probably didn't even get like a level 1 from us over here at RotoWire when the news broke. But Willson Contreras moving off of catcher to first base DH for the Cardinals going forward. To me, it's got all kinds of ripple effects with that team. I think it's good news for Willson Contreras' 2025 fantasy value. And I think it's good news for Ivan Herrera's 2025 fantasy value. But beyond that, I think Contreras is just going to play more and more likely to stay healthy, et cetera. But beyond that, Alec Burleson, Jordan Walker, Nolan Gorman, Luken Baker, those are 4 players. Willson Contreras is a 5th. And that's 5 of the Cardinals' 10 best hitters, according to Steamer. And they're all guys who belong at designated hitter or first base. And so I'm worried about these ripple effects. I've been just like, I was never in on Jordan Walker for redraft, back when he was a big prospect and stuff, just because of the price. But I've just been really annoyed at how long they've kept this outfield experiment going with him. And I think it's really impacted Jordan Walker's play at the plate, especially. It's just like, you can see him overthinking things when he's playing the outfield. He'll take his mistakes with him up to the dish. It's just something that he's working on. He's a huge guy. I think it's a mistake to be asking him to cover that much ground out there. I think he belongs at first base. But I would say the exact same thing about Alec Burleson, who is even a worse defensive outfielder per the advanced stats last year than Jordan Walker was. So, that's not even getting to guys like Nolan Gorman and Luken Baker, who I just don't really see a path to significant playing time for at the moment. So I was interested in Jordan Walker initially when it was very clear that they were moving on from Paul Goldschmidt, and just seemed like they were going to go with the youth movement and everything, and clearly, emphasize a guy like Walker, who they just haven't been able to get going. But man, should I be as worried as I am about just the fact that now the Cardinals seem to just have a bunch of DHs and only 2 guys can play each game?
I think your concern about Walker's defense is absolutely valid. I think maybe you and I are more worried about it than the Cardinals are. But then I say it and I'm like, their moves for the last several years have been hard to understand from the outside looking in. The moves that are incongruent, or even things they say and do. Willson Contreras moving off of catcher in year 1 of that deal, and then moving back 3 days later. I think was it a weekend where they decided he wasn't a catcher, and then by Monday he was a catcher again. It was bizarre enough that he signed there after being a Cub to start his career. But all that aside, the fact that they went out and made that trade to get Nolan Arenado when Walker was moving through their system, that was a sign then that they didn't believe him as a third baseman. Having Goldschmidt until recently blocked him from that spot. I think they're going to give him 1 more year to figure it out. I mean, age is probably a factor here. Jordan Walker is so young that maybe with another offseason, you could see some sort of progression on that side, even though I'm not expecting a great outcome. Maybe he could just be passable out there. As far as the guys like Burleson, Baker, I have no playing time expectation for them with the way the depth chart's built right now. I think they're almost undraftable for the current build. Maybe there's a trade or 2 coming that will open up playing time for one of those guys. The wild card in all of that is Nolan Gorman. What are they going to do with Nolan Gorman? Do they want to keep trotting him out there, giving him opportunities at second base? Like, is he the primary DH after all of this? Is he at least the DH against righties and they shuffle things around and use someone else in that spot against lefties? Like, how much do you trust Nolan Gorman's playing time? Because to me, he's sort of the more important guy from the players listed on that DH depth chart for the long haul.
Well, I mean, Alec Burleson is Yeah, he's getting treated like he's going to be playing pretty much every day by the drafting public. I think Gorman is clearly a guy who is going to struggle to see significant playing time. He's, as you mentioned, kind of an obvious platoon partner for a Burleson or for a Brendan Donovan at second base. It's just really hard to see where they find at bats for Gorman against righties. And I think they would trade him if they could, but I think it's kind of clear what his strengths and weaknesses are, and not many teams want a player like that. With his shortcomings defensively, and there's just the strikeout issues and stuff. I think it kind of feels to me like they're going to be going with Contreras and Burleson, and then Gorman maybe gets. He's probably in the lineup every day against lefties, either at second base or DH. And I think they are going to give Walker one more year, and part of it is just he's got this howitzer of an arm that I don't think they want to waste at first base, but I just think that's kind of just missing. You're just kind of missing the boat on that if you're just really desperate to turn this guy into a good right fielder when it's just not going to happen. So I ended up with a little bit of Walker early on. I'm kind of cooling on that. I'm definitely not drafting Gorman. Dylan White last week mentioned Luke and Baker. I don't think you can draft him because of this logjam, at least not until really late. And then Burleson, Steamer's got Burleson for a 273 average, 18 homers, 7 steals. It's a useful output. But if he's just strong side platooning, that can get frustrating at where his price tag is too. So I just kind of come back to where I was, where I was sort of at the beginning of the topic. It's like, this is great for Willson Contreras. It's great for Ivan Herrera. I think he's got a ton of potential. Like Derek, Steamer has Ivan Herrera as the 4th best hitter on the Cardinals.
There's like two things there, right? It's like, wow, the Cardinals have taken a pretty bad fall, and then there's also Herrera is kind of interesting especially in 2 catcher leagues. I mean, Pedro Paez is going to play a decent amount, but I think there's a path to 450 maybe at the high end plate appearances for Herrera. And in the little samples we've seen of him in the big leagues, most of them coming last year, good barrel rate, not a bad K rate, but 5 for 5 as a base stealer. It's nice to get a few bags from your catcher. Like, yeah, lots of ways it can actually work out. And he's not a bad defender either. So there's intrigue with the bat, a good enough floor defensively where he ticks all the boxes, where I do think Herrera is sort of the big winner here. If there's a secondary winner behind Contreras. Contreras having a shot to maybe match a previous career high in playing time or even exceed it is huge. Like, to have that as a catcher eligible player, for me, he's probably a top 4, top 5 catcher with ease this year, with a shot to maybe even be catcher 1 by volume.
Yeah, I mean, I think his younger brother is the clear catcher 1 heading into drafts. But if you're looking for candidates to be the 2nd best catcher, or maybe, if you're in an auction, you might even get to a valuation where you think the 2 Contreras guys are the top 2 catchers.
Yeah.
That could be fun. Okay, where do you want to go next?
Clay Holmes, maybe as a starter. It's I saw the Jeff Hoffman one a couple of weeks ago, and I thought that one made a lot of sense. I had not thought about Clay Holmes as a possible candidate for this. We went through this on an episode during the season, looking at relievers who had a wide enough arsenal where they could make that switch. Clay Holmes did not make that conversation. So where is this coming from? Is this from Holmes himself? Is this from Holmes' agent? Like, what do you think?
I mean, he's like, when I think of Clay Holmes, I think of just ground balls just through the roof, right? And that definitely is a valuable skill to have if you're a starter, but it's been a long time since he was actually working as a starter. Got to go back to 2018. He made 16 starts at AAA when he was still with the Pirates. And he was up over 100 innings pretty consistently, 2018, 2017, 2016. But he's been just a straight up reliever for a half decade now. And just, sinker slider. Certainly you could maybe expand the repertoire if you're moving to the rotation, but I don't buy this one. I I don't know. I think he's a good enough reliever as is. Maybe just a really creative team would go down that route with him. But the Rays already have like 8 starters. So I don't know. I'm not buying the Clay Holmes to the rotation one as much, but I'm also definitely not drafting him in drafts, expecting him to sign somewhere where he's the number 1 guy on the closer depth chart either.
I guess the thing about it though is he throws hard enough where he could lose a couple ticks as a starter and still have kind of average velocity for a starter. He does have the slider and the sweeper, so that sort of helps. And then because he was a starter forever ago, if you go far enough back, you'll see curveballs and changeups and other stuff. So maybe he does have the feel to bring something back as a 4th offering that he can just use to have something that works for hitters on both sides, right? It's not as goofy the more I look at it as it seemed as a headline. And I just think there is a team situation in a pitcher-friendly ballpark. I might actually be intrigued by Clay Holmes as a starter. It shocked me to see that pop up as a possible plan. So what's the draft and hold cost right now? It's got to be too high because of recent saves, right? Well, pick 300, I guess, is sort of the range. It's not absurd. If we knew you were a starter, like if we got that commitment from a team, kind of like we did when Atlanta signed Ronaldo Lopez and they made it pretty clear that was their plan, they're at least going to give him a shot to do it. Maybe at that same price, but I feel like the price jumps. I don't know if I want to pay much more than that to find out if this is going to work, even though there are some intriguing skills there.
Okay, so you mentioned Clay Holmes, and then you, like in passing, mentioned Jeff Hoffman.
Mm-hmm.
I want to talk about Griffin Jax because your podcast partner Eno actually brought him up. Like I asked him about potential guys that could, go this route of reliever to starter. He mentioned Jax a couple months ago. And then the Twins, what was it? Their bench coach basically said that he was open to it. Twins bench coach Jace Tingler indicated in a recent interview that the team is open to moving Jax into the rotation. That was from November 13th on MLB Network Radio with Mike Farron. And man, if you look at Jax's stuff and just his dominance of late and how stretched out he is relative to the average reliever, it's pretty easy to envision him taking off as a starting pitcher. Just really outstanding stuff. Had a 0.87 whip last year. Walk rates are always really low relative to just high end relievers, and you don't have to go back as far as Holmes to find Jax starting games, but he's also just been one of these relievers who's been up over 70 innings several times. So the fact that Twins are open to it, the fact that the stuff is as good as it is, I think he could get up to 125 innings or so if they stretched him out this year. And if you look at just what's possible there, I mean, he could be like a SP2 on a per start basis. That's maybe the upside, but Griffin Jax has been going in a really narrow margin in recent draft and holds. He's been going between pick 277 and 314 in the 4 most recent completed DCs. Man, I think that's just a smash to me because Joan Duran's not even the most locked in closer out there. So I feel like you have a few ways out of this. He either Jax gets stretched out. He maybe goes to spring training, doesn't get stretched out, but is sharing closing duty with Duran. Like there's several ways this could pay off, and it's not that expensive.
Yeah, I think we're seeing a level of dominance from Jax in 2024 as a reliever where you can also see a decent strikeout rate as a starter. Maybe it's a little bit like Michael King making that transition a couple of years ago. And yeah, you're not loving the innings as far as a volume number goes, but you love the per start results you're going to get. I'm in at that price for sure. I think it's not going to burn you that bad because, as you know from playing in a lot of DCs, eventually you just need guys that are going to pitch. And if he doesn't work as a starter, you're getting good ratios. You might vulture the occasional win. Maybe he does end up getting those saves. It's a little bit like the Hoffman situation where I think you can draft him and there's a couple different ways the role could hit. He's good enough to maybe make it work both ways. So yeah, I'm in. And the Twins depth chart, I mean, there's a few things that could change here. it seems like with the possible sale of the team, they're not going to commit to adding any payroll right now. So that could make someone like Pablo Lopez available via trade. They're probably not going to spend a lot in free agency, even if they keep Lopez. So you could look at this depth chart and say it's Lopez, Ryan, Bailey Ober, and then, yeah, we like David Festa and stuff models, but nothing's guaranteed to him yet. Zebby Matthews struggled. He also pops in stuff models. There's a pretty clear opening in the back of that rotation right now. Joe Ryan's coming off of I think it was Terry's strain at the end of the year. So you have an important guy coming back from a shoulder injury. I like this situation a lot for them. I expect this team to be cheap. I like taking shots on pitchers in the Central because you get lots of nice matchups too. I see Uncle Ted in the comments bringing up Simeon Woods Richardson. The way his season ended, I'm really worried about Woods Richardson as anything more than just sort of a depth 7th or 8th starter. I don't think they want to prioritize him. So Jax definitely gets that up arrow right now.
Yeah, and Michael King was the exact guy I thought of with Jax just because of how good their sliders are. And he, if you look at King, I think he went from sort of like 50 innings to 100 innings to 140. Like Jax coming off an 80 inning season, I think his first year could be well up over 100 there. So kind of want to get into a DC right now just to take Griffin Jax around like pick 260. All right, where do you want to go, Derek?
Oh, let's see. How about Yusei Kikuchi to the Angels? I mean, was there any other team? Let's throw the Rockies out of the conversation. Any other team he could have reasonably signed with that would have tempered your enthusiasm for how his season just ended more than the Angels making that move?
Yeah, I mean, they're worse than. I think I'd rather Kikuchi sign with the Reds because I think they at least know what they're doing more than the Angels do. Mm-hmm. So I think you nailed it. I think that's the worst realistic landing spot for Kikuchi.
And it's not like he's going to be a disaster, but it just takes away the higher end outcomes. I feel like the Angels so rarely get the most out of their pitching. It's just an area where that organization has struggled for so long. It's brutal. Is it a 4 ERA, a 120 whip, and a bunch of Ks? Yeah, probably. Like, he's not going to be horrible, Kikuchi. I just don't think you're going to get the Frankenstein's monster best version we started to see during that brief time in Houston.
Now, could he just show up and just be like, I'm not going to listen to anything you guys say. I'm just going to do exactly what I was doing last year. And maybe they're okay with that. Like, I guess that's possible. I was really surprised. I got asked about like, how down I was on Kikuchi after that signing. I was surprised that Steamer has him for just a 120 whip. He had a 120 whip in 2024, and that was a career best by a lot. He's got a career 134 whip. And that's kind of, I like going after Kikuchi when the price is really cheap just for the strikeouts. But, now that you're coming off a career year, I expected him to kind of be projected for more like a 127 type of whip. So I am interested to sort of see where the price settles on Kikuchi. And if everyone's just kind of running away from him because of the Angels thing, maybe that's an opportunity to jump in. His recent ADP going around pick 142 though, as low as 188. So I think the fact that his ADP is kind of already locked in that sort of higher range maybe prevents there from being a big time bargain opportunity here. And there's just a lot of good pitchers that go in that range. Would you take Yusei Kikuchi or Cody Senga? Yusei Kikuchi. I would take Ryan Pepio over Yusei Kikuchi pretty easily.
Yeah, I think I would take Senga over him too, even with the injury concerns. I find that range, that sort of 140, 180 range, if it's not a pitcher, it's a bat. There's like this last chance to go really get guys you like in that range every year before you start really filling needs on your roster. And I just think I'll always have someone else I like better than Kikuchi at that price, even if he's not going to be a total disaster.
Yeah, I agree with you. So it's a bummer. I wasn't. Was he someone that you might have been in the right landing spot, or it felt to me like I was just going to be sort of priced out regardless of where he landed. But was there a scenario you think where you might have been more interested?
Yeah, I mean, I think even Baltimore, like if they had gone in and got him, I would have been pretty excited because the team context is so good. Even if they're going to mess with the walls a little bit and left again, and that would work against him as a lefty giving up the platoon advantage to righties, it's still not enough for me to be like, oh yeah, I'm out because they're moving the wall back in a little bit, right? I think the team context was still favorable enough. Staying in Houston would have been good. There's a few other teams that are more pitching. The Cubs. I mean, the Cubs went out and added another lefty, but it was Matthew Boyd because Kikuchi's stuff is just too good. The Cubs reject stuff models, or at least march to the beat of their own stuff model. And I don't see what they see in their pitching staff, but hey, good for them for having something they like.
Okay, I'm gonna go with another pitcher who recently signed, and that's Frankie Montas, inking a 2-year, $34 million contract with the Mets, and he's got to opt out after year one, I believe, in that one. And it's, I think the time to draft Montas at an extreme value is probably over, just given the dollar figure on that contract, and everyone knows the Mets, it's a good place to pitch. But I love the way the Brewers just kind of tweaked Montas's usage of his pitches a little bit after they acquired him from Cincinnati. He's got the big fastball. I know he had a 4.55 ERA with Milwaukee, but he was actually pretty useful down the stretch in fantasy if you picked your spots with him. And I kind of think this is going to be, Luis Severino 2.0, where you're just getting decent amount of innings, bunch of strikeouts, and it's just going to be really cheap because there's not really any brand name left with Frankie Montas in fantasy. He's just, the price is so depressed, and there might even be another level for him to get to. Obviously, David Stearns running things with the Mets. I trust what they're doing with pitching, and just having a full season to kind of implement the stuff he started working on towards the end of last year. I love the idea of Frankie Montas as like my SP6 in a 15-team league. I think there's a lot of profit potential there. Yeah,
I think in the case of Citi Field especially, you're comfortable throwing him for almost all of his home starts, and you're matching him up on the road. I think there's organizational trust now, given the success that the Stearns-led front office had, building a pitching program that worked, finding veterans and getting a lot of mileage out of them. Montas has better stuff than some of the guys they've gotten great mileage out of over the years in those organizations. So I do like those tweaks, like you mentioned, a wide arsenal guy. I never thought when Frankie Montas first broke in, when he looked more like a high leverage reliever than a future starter, I never thought we'd talk about a guy that had 3 different fastballs, multiple breaking balls, like 5 or 6 pitches that were usable. So yeah, there's a ton to like here, and I'm definitely on the side that just trust the Mets' judgment when it comes to pitching, and the park certainly helps kind of give you a little more confidence, even if the skills don't.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, just look at like Jose Quintana, Shamania, Luis Severino, David Peterson, even Tyler McGill down the stretch was showing flashes. Like I want all the Mets pitchers. So I leave it to you, Derek. Who do you want to go to next?
Oh, we got a lot of good stuff here to choose from. How about that trade that the Reds made with the Royals? Jonathan India to Kansas City, Brady Singer going back the other way to Cincinnati, and Joey Wiemer may be a little more interesting in Kansas City. Maybe he's got a little more of a path to playing time, depending on what else happens there. I think the snap reaction for most people is Brady Singer going to Great American Ballpark. That's horrible. Park boos homers. Kaufman depresses them a little bit. So that swing alone is going to make the ratios kind of unusable. All I'll say is like the market might overreact to that to the point where Singer then becomes sort of a useful filler option. Not necessarily a must-have sort of guy, but someone that, because he is getting 150 plus innings, it is not terrible, will have situational value despite the change in parks. Now, India, he didn't take advantage from a home run perspective of Great American Ballpark the way I would have expected. The slugging percentage differences are clear, but I actually think this is sort of a like help me help you sort of deal for both sides that works okay, even though we're not loving what it does to each player's ceiling from a fantasy perspective.
Yeah, I like that trade a lot. Like you said, it's just kind of I think the Singer almost feels like he hasn't finished developing almost. Like I kind of like seeing him in a different org just because I think there might just be another trick he could be taught, from a fresh set of eyes, just because he is so reliant on that sinker slider, and it gets kind of predictable. And I just wonder if, the Reds, it's not a good home park, but you can use Reds pitchers at home, and they could definitely maybe unlock another gear in terms of his repertoire. So I agree with you. I wouldn't run for the hills in terms of avoiding Singer now that he's with Cincinnati, and for them to be able to get, or for the Royals to be able to get a piece they want, or a piece they wanted back. I'm a little worried about my guy Michael Massey and how this affects his strong side platoon situation that he'd been rolling with there. Maybe they can move India to DH if they're willing to do that on a full-time basis. Do you see any? And obviously Matt McLain now has a place to play every day with Cincinnati. Do you see any kind of beneficiaries there with India out of the picture in Cincy, or was it just kind of they had an extra piece and now all the pieces fit pretty seamlessly?
I think it gives you a little more of a stable playing time floor for a Noelvi Marte bounce back. I think he was a guy that I was more worried about with a veteran they prioritized playing in India, because McLean can play all over. I mean, they were talking about playing McLean in center field, I think, too, because he did that a little bit in the AFL. I don't know if I saw him play out there, but I know they were dabbling in that, and he played it at UCLA freshman year. So he just seems like he's athletic enough where they could move him around as much as they need to make all the pieces fit. But now that India's gone, I think the Noelvi Marte rebound train is one that I'm much more willing to be invested in. It's not that I believe in all the skills he showed in the small sample in 2023, but it's that I think he's good enough to do significant damage with a regular run of playing time. And I think last year, between the injury and the PED suspension, was about as much of a lost season as a player can have. So projections are going to spit out some pretty gross numbers that I'm not necessarily going to agree with, just because I don't think last season really matters. I don't think it taught us a whole lot about Marte.
Yeah, Noelvi Marte going kind of just inside pick 300 or so, but a wide-ish range. So I think there's people in each draft who want the Noelvi Marte bounce back, and they're probably playing a little bit of chicken right now. But yeah, it's a great one to cover for anyone that missed it or anyone that didn't get our thoughts on it. One guy that I just have wanted on all my teams basically since the start of the offseason is Tommy Edman, and that's largely because of the price. And he inks a long-term extension, 5 years, $74 million to stay with the Dodgers. It doesn't really impact his fantasy value, but I just, I really think Edman he's possibly in for a career year. I love the way that he played with the Dodgers after they acquired him and into the postseason. And he just seems to fit in that clubhouse perfectly. Like he's one of the guys. He's got good friendships on that team. And now that he's there for the long haul, I think he's going to be, really bought in and everything, and not worried about what his next contract's going to be. And he's only eligible at outfield right now, but he could easily add eligibility at second base or shortstop once the season starts. And Steamer's got him for 252, 15 homers, 23 steals. I buy that all the way, with maybe a chance for a bit more than that. So I don't even mind if Edman's my second outfielder. I certainly wouldn't mind if he's my third outfielder, just because you're getting close to 5 category production and a chance for him to add a different position as well in season. So the extension didn't necessarily change anything with his fantasy value, but I love the price on Edman. He's going, just inside pick 200 right now. Hasn't gone higher than pick 176. And I think he's going to give you like very similar stats to guys that go a couple rounds earlier that do have that middle infield eligibility. But like I said, Edman probably adds it at some point during the season.
It's funny that the Cardinals have 5 DHs and then they trade away Tommy Edman, and the team that people think is the smartest team in baseball give him a 5-year extension. Like, that gives you an idea where those two organizations are at right now. But Edman's not going to hurt you in batting average. He might help you. I'm with you on the double-digit homers. 20, high 20 steals seem very attainable, maybe more. And I think a lot of guys that have that profile aren't going to put up the runs and RBI counts that Edman can put up in that Dodgers lineup. So I'm with you. I mean, he fills multiple spots of need, and even though nothing's off the table for them, I don't really believe them that Mookie Betts is going to play a lot of shortstop this year. I think that's something you say in December that you probably don't have to say closer to opening day. Edman can play that spot. He can play center. He just gives them so many options. Second base could be the option if they flip Gavin Lux. All the possibilities are there. I mean, left field's a little bit unsettled right now for the Dodgers too, so playing time won't be a problem. Skills are solid. So, yeah, I'm in on Edman. I just noticed, too, looking back at some projections from last season, Teoscar Hernandez ended up being a really good value, even with an inflated price. So I wonder if sometimes we're not, as a draft market, pricing in the supporting cast bump enough with the Dodgers. I could see that happening with Edman for sure.
Yeah, and it's just the great thing about ADP is Edman was going after pick 200 for a while, and it's just the ADP is not going to be able to move up enough for him to not be a value. I don't think. It's just he got so anchored early. He'd have to get inside the top 150 for me to think twice about Edman. So, where do you want to go next, Derek?
Let's go. Have you talked a lot about Roki Sasaki on the pod?
No, I've barely talked about him. I've been trying to get Tim McLeod on, but yeah. What do you got on Sasaki?
I love this idea that the Dodgers already have a deal with him. It's like, well, come on. Like, we know when a player comes over early, like Ohtani did, that it's different. And I still think there are reasonable scenarios that put him on a different roster. And it could be San Diego was the prediction I made on Rates and Barrels a couple weeks ago, because in my head, the world works in chaos. And for the Padres to keep the AJ Preller spending sprees running hot for as long as possible, they need something like this. The universe needs Roki Sasaki to go to the Padres, because eventually there will be a reckoning with all the deals they've signed, right? Eventually that's going to be a very difficult job to untangle the mess in San Diego. But if you get Roki Sasaki for just a small percentage of what he'd get as an actual open market free agent, that is a coup. And obviously we love pitchers landing in San Diego anyway. The only real question is the stuff took a step back in 2024. It wasn't quite as electric as what we saw in the World Baseball Classic, but it was still very good. And the results we've seen from Sasaki, K- B percentages compared to the best pitchers that have come over, kind of going back as far as like Dice K, off the charts better skills, right? So a very good, solid, predictive skill that is in a tier of its own among a group of pitchers that have had a lot of success. So I love it from just a general, like, yeah, I want to see this guy pitch in the big leagues. I think he's going to be an immediate impact guy, but I think you're pricing in probably the equivalent of, like a 6-man rotation workload, even if he lands in a place that uses 5 starters because of his injury history. And then you just have that one little kind of lingering question about if the stuff drop off in 2024 was the result of a major injury that's still kind of lurking. That's sort of it. Otherwise, I mean, I can see, I don't know, an easy top 50 pick, like a guy that gives you elite ratios and well over a strikeout per inning. Like, that's the kind of pitcher I expect Sasaki to be.
Yeah, he's going in it's an affordable range, like it relative to just the amount of hype. He's going in the sort of 60 to 100 range, like 77 on average. Kind of about the same range Chris Sale was going in a year ago, and similar upside and downside. And yeah, I think, this isn't just kind of a guy that's coming over to sort of help a team. I think Sasaki views himself as just a, world superstar, who's going to be the face of a team he goes to. And so I could see him wanting to kind of chart his own path and not be on the same team as Ohtani. I thought the Orioles would be you mentioned them for Kikuchi. they're in this, and that would just be an amazing landing spot. Just pairing him with their young offensive core. Would be very excited about that. The Mets, obviously, for all the reasons we talked about, would be a great landing spot. None of these teams that are kind of in contention would be the same level of surprise as Ohtani signing with the Angels all those years ago. So I think that's it. It is kind of, it's not wide open because we know it's kind of down to 7 or 8 teams, but I wouldn't be surprised if he went to any of those 7 or 8 teams. And the decreased stuff last year, it's just it's kind of, you almost have to view him as sort of like a DeGrom or a Cole type, where there's just, he could get injured in early April and you wouldn't be able to say that you couldn't have seen this coming, but he could also finish the year as a top 10 SP and you could see that coming as well.
Right. And he doesn't need a heavy workload to do it based on what he has shown us during his time in Japan and on the international stage. I'm a sucker for pitchers like that. I mean, workloads at the top just keep shrinking anyway. So I think as that gap continues to close, I'll continue to be willing to take shots on guys like this.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about specific players and deals and trades. I want to mention the Rays planning to play their 2025 home games at Steinbrenner Field, which is the Yankees spring training facility. It's an outdoor field, so I'm wondering how many postponements there are going to be. I'm wondering whether I need to be worried about how many Rays starting pitchers I draft. Is that going to be a headache where there's games getting postponed? Is obviously it's probably not going to be as good as the Trop was for pitching. And then there's also just the dimensions of the park. Which hitters is it going to help? There's the obvious case for it helping the left-handed hitters because it is a replica of Yankee Stadium. But I also think it's going to help Junior Caminero because his power alley, center oppo power alley is just a really comfortable spot for Caminero to go. So I think he's going to benefit from the park change as well. So what do you think about just the fact of them moving from a dome to an outdoor park down in Florida and how it might affect their pitchers and hitters?
Yeah, I think what we could see is maybe early in the season, maybe it's less detrimental to the pitchers. The move out, I think, ultimately hurts the pitching. But I think as the weather warms up, once you get to June, July, August, muggy, hot summer months, that's when I think the ball is really going to fly. But the hidden thing that might be there all along is the Trop has a 3-year rolling park factor of 108 for strikeouts. It's the 4th highest in the big leagues, right? T-Mobile in Seattle's number 1 at 115. American Family Field in Milwaukee's 2 at 112. And then Truist Park in Atlanta is 3rd at 109. So 4th biggest boost to Ks, 8% easier to strike guys out just in Tampa than it is in a neutral park. So if we assume, and I don't even know if we can reasonably and quickly calculate this for Steinbrenner Field, like it's maybe more neutral just for Ks, and then it plays closer to neutral or above average for anything, especially left-handed power, all of those shifts are in the favor of hitters. The only complicating factor for me with the Rays and whether or not their pitchers are over, undervalued, or inappropriately valued is that a lot of those guys are coming off of injuries. Like Shane Baz didn't look quite like himself right away, but then kind of by the end of the season was tracking more towards being the guy a lot of us expected him to be when he got hurt. So I could see the skills questions with Baz dropping his price enough where you're still getting a good value, even though the park situation is a little bit worse. McClanahan coming off a second TJ, like maybe there's already a discount priced in on there. Maybe we shouldn't draft him anyway because it's second TJ. As much as I like watching Shane McClanahan, that might be a bad idea around pick 100, pick 120. Pepio might be the most appropriately priced based on skills and what he did last year, but even like pick 150 for Ryan Pepio doesn't seem that bad if you make his park a bit more difficult or closer to neutral. So I think because of what the market's done with the pitchers, they're not necessarily avoids for me. And I think the question will be, are people adjusting the hitters enough? I think there might be some actual bargains on the hitting side to take advantage of. Beyond Caminero, I love Junior Caminero. It's like, how much do I trust Josh Lowe to be an everyday guy given the makeup of their depth chart? The price right now is pretty good. Pick 141 to 196, I think is his range in the last 2 weeks. I have no concerns about him there. So I think Josh Lowe is someone I like. And then it kind of comes back to some late shots. Like, which late shots do you trust for playing time? Do you trust Johnny DeLuca's glove to carry him enough in center field? Do you think they can find a spot for Christopher Morel? Is Jonathan Aranda finally going to get a run as an everyday DH or occasional first baseman, right? Like, the Rays always have questions like this, but there's some interesting opportunities because the prices on these bats are generally very low.
Yeah, I love the price on Josh Lowe. I mean, he was getting drafted like in the top 75 when we thought he might still get platooned last year.
Yeah, and I wasn't really in at that price, but the possibility that he doesn't and the discount are enough to say, yeah, okay, I'll throw the dart. It's same kind of range maybe as Tommy Edman. Like, okay, but maybe more ceiling if it all clicks.
And I mean, that just Josh Lowe and Tommy Edman right there are good examples of why you don't have to necessarily chase speed at the top. And then Jonathan Aranda, I love the park change for him. Shouts to Rob DiPietro. I just did not realize how good Aranda was down the stretch last year. And he was quite good. So I think you can project a platoon for Josh Lowe and Aranda and still buy them at their price right now. And then if they don't get platooned, there's even more room to benefit from that. But I think you're right. Like, I think take a look at those Rays. I do think DeLuca's defense will keep him out there. And Johnny DeLuca, for everyone, I probably overranked him on my initial early rankings this year, but Steamers got Johnny DeLuca for a 14-15 season with just 115 games. So definitely power speed there.
That's gonna creep the price up a little bit, right? I mean, now that Steamer's out there, it's gonna get factored into people's projections, or it'll be used as the main set for a lot of folks. And you do see bumps as each new system sort of comes out over the course of draft season.
So Derek, I want to start wrapping things up here. I do want to mention Zach Neto. He had shoulder surgery early in the offseason and could miss opening day. That definitely changes my interest level in Neto, just because I'm expecting him probably to miss at least a couple weeks, maybe even more than that. And he was someone I loved kind of in like that 5th, 6th round range before the shoulder surgery. So just if anyone kind of missed that and is like eyeing up Zach Neto, I would treat him as more kind of like in the 200s or so, early 200s or so right now, just based on the current information, because you need a guy like that to be compiling all the counting stats over 150 plus games, and I don't think he'll quite get there.
I loved him too as someone that I thought was going to be even maybe still a little undervalued at a new price this year. It's a huge blow. I think the way the Angels are kind of coy about the specific nature of the shoulder procedure gives me some extra red flags. Like, I'm just going to err on the side of caution until we start getting any sort of indication that he's able to get through his rehab or start doing things, swinging the bat, making throws, all the stuff that matters. So yeah, I'm with you on that price. He has to fall a long way for me to put him on a roster right now.
Okay, so I'm just going to go through the stuff we didn't cover really quick in order of what happened longest ago. So at the very beginning of the offseason, the Angels traded Griffin Canning to Atlanta for Jorge Soler. Canning was subsequently DFA'd by Atlanta. So basically, the Angels were willing to take on Soler from Atlanta. Ronald Acuna is unlikely to be ready for opening day per Alex Anthopoulos. That, take that as truth as much as you want, but just recognize that there is reporting out there from the GM that Ronald Acuna is unlikely to be ready for opening day. Michael Wacha re-ups 3 years, $51 million with the Royals. So he's staying put there after a great season. Shohei Ohtani underwent shoulder surgery on his non-throwing arm, which could delay his pitching debut for the Dodgers. Kyle Hendricks keeping it going with a 1-year, $2.5 million deal with the Angels. The Athletics are not considering moving Mason Miller to the rotation. We touched on Jeff Hoffman and Griffin Jax and Clay Holmes potentially getting stretched out. I like this news that the Athletics are not going to stretch Mason Miller out because you had to pay high closer price for him in the first place, and I didn't want to do that and risk him only getting 10 saves or 0 saves, and now I think you can at least project 30 saves, 28 saves or something like that from Mason Miller. Travis d'Arnaud signs a 2-year, $12 million deal with the Angels, which opens things up for potentially Drake Baldwin as the backup in Atlanta. The Orioles moving in their left field fences, so that will potentially help maybe a guy like Kobe Mayo as they kind of try to make that park a little bit easier for their hitters. Nick Martinez was the only player to accept a qualifying offer. He did that with the Reds. I know we talked about Brady Singer going to the Reds. Are you worried at all about them? It looks like they got 6 guys for that rotation. And maybe Rhett Lauder opens at AAA. I don't know. Is that kind of your read on that one?
Yeah, but I'm not really staying away from Lauder. I think Nick Lodolo's injury history is extensive and unfortunate. So I think that alone, Hunter Green just throws so damn hard that you're kind of just waiting for IL stints for him, even though I really like what he brings to the table. So you got 2 pretty high risk guys on that depth chart. And you could also say Andrew Abbott is as confusing as he can be when he's effective. There's not any strong reason why you have to keep him in the rotation. If Lauder looks better than Abbott, couldn't you just, bump Abbott to a long relief role? Is that a crime?
That's not a crime in my book. I think that'd be perfectly fine. The Rays traded Jose Siri to the Mets for Eric Orsi, and there's nothing David Stearns likes more than elite center field defense. So was not surprised to see that landing spot. And he kind of takes over the Harrison Bader role, I guess, from last year. We had a few semi-interesting non-tenders. The Nationals non-tendered Kyle Finnegan. The Rockies non-tendered Brendan Rodgers. The Blue Jays non-tendered Jordan Romano. The Pirates non-tendered Brian De La Cruz. The Phillies non-tendered Austin Hayes. Kyle Farmer takes Brendan Rodgers' spot, at least in the short term, as the Rockies' second baseman, I guess, on a 1-year deal. But I do think Dale Amador is going to be up fairly soon in that spot. The Red Sox have discussed moving Rafael Devers to first base. Matthew Boyd, 2-year deal, $29 million with the Cubs. Kyle Higashioka, 2-year, $13.5 million deal with the Rangers. And Aroldis Chapman with a 1-year, $10.74 million deal with the Red Sox. Anything you want to touch on there, Derek?
I mean, it sure looks like an opportunity for Chapman to get at least a share of saves in Boston, right? That's another spot where that's on the table. Liam Hendricks is still there, right? He's kind of a forgotten guy because of all the missed time with injuries, but that was a multi-year deal. So I don't know what to expect from Liam Hendricks, but I think given that uncertainty alone, you probably say 10 to 12 saves for Chapman is an easy floor for him.
Yeah, I don't love this for my Justin Slayton DC shares. But it just kind of got more complicated, I guess, because Hendricks is definitely going to be involved. I do think Slayton pitched well enough to be involved. So not in love with that, I guess, for any of those guys. And the Red Sox thinking about moving Devers to first base. I mean, what the heck were they doing with that Yoshida contract? They're just doing everything they can to get off of that. No one will take it. And so I don't think they're going to be able to make that move unless they're able to trade Yoshida, because then they just don't have the playing time for Casas.
I remember when Yoshida signed that deal, I think Keith Law had some free agent contract projections or some rankings up, and either Yoshida wasn't on the list, and it was enough free agents where anybody getting that kind of money should have been, or the money was way off. I think it was the former, but they were just on their own page with Yoshida. And the fact that he really doesn't play the outfield well or can't play the outfield is a huge, huge problem for them. Devers moving to first base makes all the sense in the world. So are they going to trade low on Tristan Casas to make it happen? Because that at least is a player other teams would want. Yoshida, unless you're eating most of that money, I just don't see a market for him.
Yeah, for my guy Jason DuPont's sake, I really hope they don't trade just his friend Tristan Casas. We'll see how that goes. Derek, this has been an absolute blast. I really appreciate being so grateful with your time, or gracious with your time. Do you have anything to plug before I let you go?
No, not much. Rates and Barrels still rolling on through the winter, so check it out wherever you listen to shows if you haven't done that already. And I'm over on Blue Sky. I'm over there. Just DVR over there if you're looking for me. I don't. What do they call it? It's not tweeting anymore.
Is it
Skeeting?
skying?
I think they call them skeets. And I'm like, man, I went to college in the early 2000s. I'm not calling it that. Like, it's just too. I just hear logjam in my head every. Like, I'm not gonna do that.
Well. I'm over there too, but I still tweet and I still sky. So
yeah, I'm lurking really on both. I'm not very. I should be more active probably on both. But I read more than I write.
Yes, absolutely. Same for me. Well, thank you so much, Derek, and I'll be back with another episode next week.